Welcome to the Tech for Good Southwest podcast, brought to you by Annie, Alicia and Ariel. Here at Tech for Good Southwest, we are on a mission to build momentum for the Tech for Good movement here in Bristol, Bath and across the Southwest. We're going to be joined by charities, investors, startups and initiatives to share their stories, their challenges and their successes in driving Tech for Good. Hi, welcome to the Tech for Good Southwest podcast, and I'm your host for today, Annie Legg. And today I'm delighted to welcome John Bradford, who is the lead and the vision behind Digilocal initiative across Bristol. So thank you for joining us, John.
Oh, thank you for the invitation, Annie.
Yeah, that's great. Firstly, can we start off with a little bit about your background and I guess what led to the vision for Digilocal, and just tell us all a bit about what that is?
Sure. I guess everything began in early 2015. I was running a community interest company called High Tech Bristol and Bath at the time, and that was focused on supporting the high tech community industry around Bristol and Bath. And we co-hosted an event with the Local Enterprise Skills Partnership on the skills challenge facing the high tech sector. One of the key questions in that event was around the lack of diversity in high tech. And it's widely recognized that there's a challenge there. And part of this workshop was to look at how we could, locally at least, help address some of those issues. And a lot of the questions were going as to why people weren't recruiting, why people weren't training, why people weren't going in. And the conversation ended up around primary school aged young people and why so many of them don't see high tech as a career path. And one of the comments that came out of the group quite insightfully was that everybody in high tech had a parent or a friend of a parent or somebody in their parent's social circle who worked in high tech or had been to university and studied. And so that was their connection, introduction to that. And many of the communities we were thinking about, those connections didn't exist. And was there something we could do across the Bristol and Bath region to provide those young people with those experiences that we as engineers, I'm an engineer by training, that we as engineers had that got us into this thing called high tech back when we were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And that's clearly a bigger challenge than we can tackle nationally. But I felt at the time for High Tech Bristol and Bath, that was something we might look at developing locally with the network of industry and connections that we had to give those young people those opportunities. So I had some funds from an event we'd hosted that we used to buy some laptops. I knew the Somali Resource Centre at Barton Hill Settlement. So I asked them, if I rock up with 10 laptops and some cool stuff to do on them, do you think you can fill the room with 10 young people from the community that might not otherwise get involved with technology? And 8 years later, we're running Digilocal with 18 club sessions every week. And that's kind of the genesis. So it was always about giving those young people that don't have access to technology or to mentors within the technology space the opportunity to figure out what it's all about.
And could you talked, you mentioned the word sort of high tech quite often. I think you're referring to that in the context of engineering. Can you give us a bit more of a definition of what's encompassed by that high tech concept?
High tech. It's a wonderfully elastic phrase, isn't it? As we've developed the thinking around Digilocal and particularly our engagement with communities as young people, we've sort of drifted away from talking about high tech within the context of Digilocal. And that, I won't say disconnect, but that tension, if you like, was one of the reasons we separated Digilocal out from High Tech Bristol and Bath, and it became its own charity in 2019. So what we now talk about with young people is building their problem-solving skills and building their resilience as young people. We do that through coding clubs and project-based activities. So the high tech is really software coding, but the focus is very much around developing problem-solving skills, building resilience, developing those skills that they can take forward into any industry, any career they choose. It will be valuable. We're giving them a foundation in coding so they can start to see if this thing called software technology is where they see their future. If they enjoy it, then they can choose which of the many avenues are open to them to go down. But equally, if they come along to our clubs and they start building some cool stuff from scratch and they go, actually, I'm not really enjoying this that much. I want to do something else. That's also a valid outcome because they've had the opportunity to try in a structured way building a program. They've seen that maybe that's not what excites them. Maybe they're more excited by sport and physical activities or creativity and design or languages or something else. But they know what coding is. It's about making things happen in a logical way. There's structure to it. It's not that the computer doesn't like them. It's just that the computer's doing something that they hadn't expected it to do. So it opens that world out, and it's that exposure to technology, the opportunity to engage in technology, that they can then decide where that takes them.
Yeah, I think even being able to understand what coding actually is and the fact that everything that we're using day to day has that fundamentally underneath it is, that's really important, isn't it, for whatever career actually path that you take, whether you go into high tech or not.
Absolutely. And our conversations with industry following on and over the growth of Digilocal, as many of our volunteers work for accounting firms, insurance firms, civil engineering firms, construction firms, as work in the advanced aerospace and what you might consider high tech with those little inverted quotes around it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about young people that particularly don't have access to maybe the mentoring or the opportunity to do this. Can you be a bit more specific around either the age that you target, or like how do you find the right people that you know are going to benefit or enjoy being part of the clubs?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, age is the easiest one. We welcome young people from ages 8 years and up. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is around just managing young people and young people's clubs, but also there's a cognitive element where the level of abstraction involved in software gets harder as you get younger. 8 seems to be a tipping point. So 8 years and up. In terms of who we look to support more widely, we've started to use the phrase marginalized to act as a broad umbrella term for groups of young people that in the past have been separated from the opportunity to engage in technology. Girls is a classic example. Many young women these days are still told that technology stuff, that's not for you, that math stuff, that's not for you. And of course, that's nonsense. People of colour are another group that are, broadly speaking, told this technology stuff may not be for you. Go and do something else. Go and get involved in sport. And so we aim to work with those groups that are marginalised. I guess the inverse of that would be, middle class white boys from a good background with a father that works in engineering is probably not our target market. They make fantastic volunteers because they understand it, but they're probably not our target market. The way we find them is by working closely with partners. So we work very closely with the Bristol Somali Resource Centre. We work very closely with Southmead Development Trust, with the Venture at Lockleys Play Space, with BS3 Community, with the Library Service in South Gloucestershire. And all of our clubs are hyper-local. So they're in community venues like the Play Space, like the library. And most of the young people will walk to the club. So by placing our clubs where those young people live, then we can be reasonably confident without any inward vetting that the young people attending are from those communities and those marginalised groups that we particularly want to encourage.
That's amazing. Just working with those partners particularly. So the young people, maybe just take that example of the starting age of 8-year-olds. What are they actually learning in a coding club? What are they doing? Which I guess differs. You probably have 2 or 3 age brackets, I imagine, but
We don't, well, we have an age spread. We don't categorise by age, so they don't graduate from junior to higher. What they do changes as they gain experience with our clubs. And I would say there's several levels to the learning. At the surface level, they're learning to code. They're learning Scratch and Python and how to make rocket ships fly through space and play Pong and do all kinds of cool stuff like that. So they are learning code phrases. At a slightly deeper level, they're beginning to understand computational thinking and how to break a large problem down into smaller logical pieces and then reassemble those logical pieces to make something complex happen. So if they're making a rocket ship fly through space, land on an alien planet, that's quite a big complicated thing. But if they learn how to make a sprite move and then broadcast that it's done that, then something else can listen for that broadcast, change the background, move a few other things around, and then do an animation flying through space, and then it can do the animation flying down. So we can split that into 3 distinct phases or operations. So they're starting to learn how to break these complicated things down into smaller functional objects. And alongside that, we start to introduce phrases like objects, functions, methods, loops, iteration. I think we even use the word concatenation somewhere, but quickly explain, it just means joining 2 things up. It's not very complicated. So they're beginning to understand the computational thinking process. And at a much more fundamental level, they're going through a problem-solving cycle. They're figuring out, what do I want this thing to do? How do I go about making it do it? Okay, it's done something that I didn't expect. What did I expect it to do, and what's the difference? And how do I get between the two? How do I solve that problem? How do I fix that? And then alongside that, they're also building resilience so that when it doesn't do what they expect, they don't just flip the laptop out the window and run away screaming. They sit down calmly and go, okay, that didn't work. What can I learn from that? How do I make it work? And so that's why at the fundamental level, it's those problem-solving skills that they can apply to any computational language. We use Python and Scratch because they're very easy to get into, but off book, I know several of our young people are playing around with JavaScript. Some of them are learning C#, C++. Some are learning other more exotic languages. And that's fantastic because they've obviously been bitten by the bug. And that process of going from how do I make something simple happen? How do I extend it? Okay, that hasn't worked. What did I expect it to do? What's actually done? How do I get between the two? That loop, that problem-solving loop, is really core to everything that's coming out of our activities.
It feels to me, well, it sounds like it's very self-directed. So the individuals are there, the young people are coming together in the same space, but they've got their
Yeah.
own learning journey.
Yeah.
Do some sort of work in teams, or is it very much a kind of, we're all here together, but we're working in our own separate spaces?
In the core club activity, it's separate spaces. They're all on their own journey, and as I say, we don't have an age group split. So we have some incredible young people aged 8, 9, 10 years old who are working in Python at quite a sophisticated level, and they have that freedom to do that. We're not railroading their path. We do host and encourage external challenges and activities and opportunities where they will come together in teams. So some of those would be the Raspberry Pi Mission Zero, where a team of young people can come together to write some Python code that will then be squirted up to the International Space Station, run on a hardened Raspberry Pi up there for the astronauts, and then they get a team certificate of where the space station was when their code ran. Another example would be the NASA Space Apps. There's a lot of space coming up. NASA Space Apps Challenge, where NASA issue a series of global challenges and teams of scientists, engineers, and enthusiasts come together to solve those challenges. That's not a youth event. That's a global code jam for anybody interested in science and data. But we bring our young people in and say, okay, this is working at a much higher level than you're perhaps used to, but there's a path into that and we can support you. But as a team, you need to figure out which bit you're doing, which bit your teammate's doing, how you're going to bring those bits together. And it's just a slightly higher level of problem solving in a group. The individual clubs, folks tend to work quite self-directed, yes.
Yeah. How amazing to connect to coding up to the space station.
It's insane, I know.
It is. I'm wondering what happens like at a certain age. What's the cutoff age, and then where might they go once they can't come to one of your clubs anymore?
We're a youth charity, so under the terms of the Charity Commission, 21 is our oldest. Having said that, we don't have anybody that age, and our stuff isn't really suitable. If you're over 18, I would say you probably should be doing an employment or proper training course, not a Digilocal coding club. What we have seen, and when we launched Digilocal back in 2015, we didn't have a clear exit strategy for the young people. It was kind of, the first challenge was to keep them engaged. And we kept them engaged, and some of them have been with us for 6 years now. They're now 14. And so what we're doing now is putting together a software development team, project delivery team of those 14-year-olds, and offering that to industry as a development resource. So for companies that have a project that they might go to a software development company and say, can you do some work on data visualization or manipulation, or some kind of data I'm talking about data a lot because most of our stuff is Python. That could be a project that these young people would work on and present back to the client a finished piece of work. Not at production code levels, clearly, they're only 14, but we will have industry mentors in as technical directors and code reviewers to make sure what they produce is of a standard that would be acceptable. And that will give them, firstly, team experience, but it will also change the dynamic slightly because all of our projects are very game focused, very playful, and a lot of them are open to being tweaked or interpreted according to the young person's interest. This would be a brief from a client that says, I want you to build this, and the young people would then have the 6 weeks of the summer holidays to convert that into a deliverable project. So this is starting to think about how do we migrate young people from pure fun and enjoyment to fun and enjoyment, but with a bit more of an employment pathway coming into that, to say this could also be a career from you as well as something fun to do on a Tuesday evening.
That, John, is amazing. Absolutely amazing to think that actually companies can engage a group of 14-year-olds. But the benefits both sides. I can see that's absolutely amazing. So that type of project, and obviously the clubs themselves, I understand they're primarily run by volunteers.
Yep.
Can you just sort of talk a little bit about, like, how do you become a volunteer? What sort of person, and is it more than one person that's involved in leading these clubs? How does it practically work?
The starting point is always the community venue. And we work quite hard with our community partners to find venues where those young people are. Once we have a community venue together, then we start to recruit volunteers to support each venue. We need at least 2 volunteers for each venue for our safeguarding policy. So volunteers are always working in pairs. They're never on their own with a young person. They're never running a club on their own. They should always have that second person as backup. The individuals then, those volunteers, generally come from some technical background, but most actually don't work as software developers, with the inverted quotes again. We have engineers, we have some scientists, we have some, again, business people, but with perhaps some coding background or some web development background. They're people that can get into that engineering problem solving process, but not necessarily 14 years experience of C++. The young people are following project guides for the most part. So at the simplest level, the problem solving can be make your code look like the guide and it'll work. That's not very useful. What tends to be more useful is for the volunteer to sit alongside the young person or crouch down alongside the young person so they're on eye level and get that young person to go through the problem solving process. So explain to me, what's your code actually doing? Okay, now describe what it should do. Okay, so how are we going to get between the two? And then either with the blocks in Scratch or with the code available in Python, start to come up with a solution. It may not match the solution in the guide. And that's fine, because there's multiple ways of solving the same problem in code. That's one of the great things about software. But as long as the code does what it should do, then you can compare it and say, okay, well, we solved it this way. The guide's got this code. Both are valid. Yours will work. Carry on building your project from there. So they need to be people that are quite patient. They need to be people that are very willing to let others make mistakes and support that learning process, because the other thing that can be quite challenging is to watch a young person halfway through typing in a line of code you know isn't going to work, but they need to write it in and run the program to see the error to then figure out why it doesn't work. And as long as they don't go too far down that rabbit hole, then realizing that, oh, they've missed a bit out, or they've used the wrong variable, or their indentation is slightly wrong, so instead of it going around the loop all the time, actually it's not in the loop. Giving them the space to do that is really powerful learning. That's how generally we learn from our mistakes. So our volunteers need that patience to let the young people go do their thing, but then be approachable to say, okay, well, how do we make that better? What's the right solution? Not to jump in and go, this is how you do it. Because again, young people don't learn that way. You need to coach them, mentor them through, we talk about mentoring a lot, mentor the young person through the way that either the guide does it, or how, if the volunteer is familiar with that language, they can come up with their own solution. Okay, well, this is how I would do it. And that's brilliant, because then the young person gets to see a real engineer solving a problem, perhaps for the first time. So how do we solve this? Okay.
Yes.
So if you enjoy that kind of mentoring, supporting people come on, if you've got a bit of an engineering background or interest, and you've got an hour a week, then potentially you'd be a fantastic volunteer.
How many people generally? What's the average number of people in each club?
Each club is up to 10 young people. So we have 2 packs with 5 laptops in each pack that go around the clubs. So the volunteers will unpack the laptops, plug them all in. We pop the laptops up, get them all signed into the laptop. The young people then have their own unique Google Workspace accounts. So they'll sign into their Google Workspace, download their saved work from the last session, open up the project guide, start working away. Volunteers can then wander around the outside of the young people. So we try and cluster them in the middle. I'm waving my hands on a podcast. That's going to go down well. The young people, we try and sit them in a ring. So the volunteers walk around the outside. And then as young people get stuck and either put their hand up or ask, or are just sort of sitting there staring at the screen a bit confused, then the volunteers can sort of step forward and get the young person to open up and say, what's happening? Is it behaving as you expect it? Is it misbehaving? How do we help solve that? And then at the end of each session, everybody saves their work, upload it back to Google, sign out of Google Workspace, pack everything away. We then come, Digilocal, we then come and pick the laptops up and move them to the next venue. The volunteers will be 2 volunteers to about 10 young people, and their engagement is in that 1 hour with the young people, helping them learn, helping them grow and develop. All the admin, all the administration, the back end stuff, that's the stuff that the charity does, so that the volunteers can focus on the young people.
And you were talking about the laptops. It's obviously a very, very well executed process to get these clubs running. You also do laptop repurposing, is that right?
We do, yes. So when COVID hit, we stopped all of our in-person clubs overnight, and we launched an online club format. So we also have online sessions. But recognizing the young people in the communities we're supporting, many of them didn't have access at home to online educational resources. So we gifted out our 30 club laptops to young people that were attending the clubs to support their online education. And somebody found out about that and said, oh, I've got a laptop. Could you do the set? Could you sort it out, get rid of the data, and give it to a young person in need? And it's like, yeah, okay, we can do that. And we've now done that for about 2,000 laptops, and
Wow.
continue to do that we're running at probably about 100 a month or slightly less. It fluctuates slightly. Sometimes it goes down, sometimes it goes up. But yeah, so we've got an arrangement with Avon Fire and Rescue Service. They're permanently stationed fire stations in the communities, are accepting donated laptops on our behalf. Any working Windows laptop with a webcam and a power cable, we can accept in, do a full 3-pass data wipe, overwipe to destroy the hard disk. We then install Ubuntu Linux onto that, along with a few packages like Zoom and Chrome, set that up with an admin account and a user account, and then issue that with a new ownership document that gives the receiving person access to the laptop. They go out through our extended network of community partners. So we don't do the vetting of who gets a laptop, who doesn't. It's the anchor community organizations that are working with these families on a daily basis, know who the ones are in need, know who will benefit, know who's engaging with educational services but just needs a bit of extra resource support, and those laptops then go out through that system.
There's a big, well-run processes that you have there, and lots that you're doing. How would you describe the impact that you have with Digilocal? How do you measure it, I guess, and what do you need in terms of sort of scaling what you do, if that's your ambition?
Well, I mean, with most charities, the scaling question is always, we want to grow and do more until the issue that we'd set up to challenge has gone away.
Yeah.
So when there are no young people that are lacking the opportunities to access this technology stuff, then there's no need for Digilocal, and we'll shut up shop and go home. That hasn't happened and is unlikely to happen in the near future. So yes, we would like to grow and develop. The simplest measure of impact is attendance. As I mentioned, a lot of our young people have been attending for over 6 months, and several have been attending for 6 years or more. So something's going on there. They're enjoying what we do, regardless of any other evaluation. They're attending, they're coming back, they're liking it. We do have young people that come along and clearly don't enjoy it, and then we can have the conversation with the parents to say, young person, fantastic, lovely kid. No, they're really great. They're just not enjoying this. And you can't make someone have fun. So if they're not having fun, they're not going to learn. They're not going to benefit. Let's find something else for them to do. Find another club for them, and we'll offer their place to another young person on the waiting list. In terms of formal evaluation, at the end of each project, we ask the young people to fill out a very short 8-question feedback form. And 4 of those questions are broadly about their confidence in their ability to complete the project. And the other 4 are on the support and encouragement they had from the volunteers. And so what we can do then is look at a young person's profile. These are all submitted on Google Forms, and we hash the emails. So we've got a unique identifier that's not traceable back to the individual. But what we can then do is track an individual hash young person over 5, 6, 10, 20 projects, and see how their confidence varies as they tackle new and more challenging topics, how the support they get from the volunteer drops away as they're getting more confident, and then comes back up again when their confidence takes a dive, and all that kind of stuff. And we're starting to come up with profiles of young people's journey through our content. And there's a couple of sort of templates that have come out, and one is the aha moment when they suddenly realize that they can do this, and there's a huge spike in confidence. The other one is the more gentle plateau, confidence remaining high, but they're taking on more challenging projects. So if they weren't learning, growing, and developing, you would expect their confidence to dip off as things got harder and they came up against bigger challenges, but it stays high. So they're growing and developing in a positive way. That's fantastic. And then the other profile we see is when they migrate from Scratch to Python, and they go from a very visual, block-based environment into a much more challenging written environment, Python, and they don't have everything available, and there's a lot more options to them. And then we can quite often see a dip, or they're less confident in what they're doing. They're not sure they've achieved what they could do. The volunteer support often goes up at that point as well, and then hopefully we see that confidence come back as they again learn more about Python, gain a bit more skill, and off they go. So that's our evaluation. We're beginning to look at social economic background. That's very challenging for a number of reasons around ethics and data. So for the moment, our main evaluation are those confidence reports and attendance.
And what do you need most in order to do more of what you're doing?
We're talking about this is volunteers. In all honesty,
Okay.
volunteers are our largest constraint. If we had another 8 to 10 volunteers, we could launch another 3 to 4 clubs almost overnight. We've got very good relationships with a few communities where we don't have clubs. We've got some very good relationships with communities where we have had clubs, but volunteers' work has changed. They've moved on, they've moved out of area, whatever. Those clubs have had to fold or be paused, so we could relaunch them very quickly. So volunteers is always my key ask from any community group when I'm talking to companies. If they have people that are interested in volunteering in the evenings, we'd love to have them on board. That's our biggest constraint. Cash is always an issue. We're a fairly lean organisation. There's only 2 members of staff, myself and Yasmin, but we need to be employed. We need to buy groceries and food and pay rent and stuff. So there is a core cost associated with running the club, but the individual clubs themselves are very low cost. It's usually the rental hire fees of the venues, which we like to pay because that helps to support those community partners we're working with.
Of course. And do you run any clubs in Bath, or are they mainly Bristol based? And I think you said South Gloucestershire.
We haven't yet. Again, if we have volunteers interested, I know communities and community organisations, anchor organisations over there that would love to host. It's partly capacity of me traipsing around making these connections, but ultimately it comes down to those volunteers.
Yeah. So a big call out quite clearly there for any more volunteers, obviously in Bristol, but actually we'd love to see, I'm based in Bath, would love to see some of these clubs happen more locally as well. So if anyone's interested, then definitely get in touch with John. And this is just such a good example, such a good Tech for Good example in every possible way in terms of what you're practically doing with the clubs, but also the repurposing of the laptops. And this is so much more than just learning code. As you spoke very eloquently to, it's also about the other benefits that will be skills that don't get taken away and can be applied to any job. And I can clearly see even the social aspect and the benefit of coming together in community venues with other members of the community. So a final question for you, John. What does Tech for Good mean to you? And I guess particularly what your hopes and aspirations are more broadly for the Bristol region?
I guess at the end of the day, Tech for Good for me is leaving things in a better way than you found them. And that can apply for envirotech, coding tech, social, whatever. It's leaving things in a better way than you found them. And I hope that what we do with Digilocal means that the communities we're supporting and working with are left in a better state. They're more resilient. They've got more internal capacity and capability for economic growth than when we started Digilocal 8 to 10 years ago. And I suppose my ultimate vision would be that in some period of time in the future, I don't want to set a date on it, then any young person in the Bristol Bath greater region would have the opportunity to discover their digital talents and develop them in whichever direction they choose.
I love that. So how do people get in touch with you, John? Because clearly we're going to get lots more volunteers coming now because, I think it's you can't deny what impact that these clubs have, but also the importance, continuing importance of them. This isn't something that's going away, as you said as well. How best to get in touch with you?
So the best way is by email. There are a couple of forms on our website, and I'm sure the website will be linked in the description. Or what we need from volunteers are an hour of your time in the evening. Our clubs generally run between 6 and 7 o'clock in the evening, so it's after working hours. They will require an enhanced DBS, but we can help with that through STEM Learning. The STEM Ambassador Program can provide you with a free enhanced DBS for volunteering with young people. The clubs run throughout the year, so they include summer holiday periods, which is the other reason for having 3 or 4 volunteers supporting a club, so that folks can take holidays. We recognise that. And then in exchange, volunteers will get the warm, glowing feeling of supporting others. But actually, there are tangible benefits for volunteers. You're gaining skills in managing teams, talking to people, all those softer skills that are particularly important for leadership roles. You're developing your own mentoring and teaching skills, which are quite often important for leading teams. If you haven't used Python before, it's a great way to learn Python. Teaching an 8-year-old is a great way to learn Python, I can tell you that. As a mechanical engineer who's self-taught, it's amazing for that. And we're very keen also for volunteers to author their own project guides for the young people. So we have half a dozen project guides now written by volunteers on topics that are of interest to them. And that's another great way of practicing your art as an engineer, software developer, team leader, to explain the process for somebody else of going through building something cool in code.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, John. This has been, you're doing so much and you've been doing it for a long time as well. So I can really get the sense of, a very well executed process to have these clubs running as they do. Hopefully we can get some more volunteers and open some more clubs as well. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your journey with us.
Oh, thank you, Annie, again for the invitation. It's been wonderful to talk about my favourite subject.
Thank you, John. Bye.
All right.